Okay. And with that, I would love to introduce Susan Gilliland, who will have the privilege and honor of introducing our speaker tonight. Susan?
Thank you, Ron. Now we can get serious, Ryan. I'm sorry about all those bad jokes, and I apologize. We're really pleased to have you with us tonight, Dr. Ryan Terrill. Ryan grew up in Santa Cruz, surrounded by birds and a birding family. And so Ryan has been a birder his entire life. Ryan is the author of many peer-reviewed articles and co-author of The Birds of Bolivia. Ryan received his bachelor's degree in ecology and evolution from the UC Santa Cruz and his PhD from Louisiana State University, studying the evolution of molt strategies in birds. Ryan is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Moore Lab of Zoology at Occidental College, where he's working on molt in the Mexican monsoon and the Mexican bird resurvey project, and now is studying bird migration in Bear Divide in the San Gabriel Mountains. Ryan is a pioneer in understanding bird migration in our local mountains and has begun a regular bird count to quantify the numbers and identities of birds migrating through Bear Divide. So tonight, Dr. Terrill will update us on the status of spring migration across the divide. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Ryan Terrill.
Thanks so much, Susan. Thanks for that wonderful and really sweet introduction. And thanks, Mark and Ron, for the eclectic prelude to the talk. I will go ahead and share my screen, optimize for video. Actually, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do that. Okay, I think we're good. Can I just have a panelist unmute really quickly and tell me that it looks good?
It looks really good.
Great, thank you so much. All right. Yeah, so thanks everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks Susan for introducing me. Like she said, I am a postdoctoral researcher at the Moore Lab of Zoology, and I'm currently studying a resurvey project, doing a resurvey project in Mexico, going back to sites where we have big collections of birds from Mexico to try to understand what's changed in the past 100 years. But that's not what I'm talking about tonight. Tonight, what I'm talking about is kind of what I've been doing before going to work and doing my real job for the past couple springs up around here, which is looking at birds migrating through Bear Divide and kind of what's going on there, what it's all about, and what we've been doing with it. So this is just kind of a general outline of the presentation. I'll just kind of explain what Bear Divide is, a little bit of history, talk a little bit about what morning flight and migration is, why we think birds might migrate through Bear Divide, talk a little bit about what species we see, how many birds might use Bear Divide, what we've learned so far, and things like how you can keep up with what we're doing and how you can even participate and help out. So what is Bear Divide? Bear Divide is just a place where you can go and stand there and watch a bunch of birds migrate by, which I think is really cool. This is a little video that it's kind of hard to see exactly what's going on, but I think it sort of captures the fun and excitement of Bear Divide, especially because Christine's there and she's always good at capturing fun and excitement. So this is a video I took last spring up there.
Oof. You see how much is moving through right now?
Oh god. I'm having so much fun looking at the hermit warblers.
We'll just call these pastures spurs because I'm taking a video.
20 warblers flying over.
God, we're like 80.
Yeah. National right by my face.
Wilson's just like tried to murder. Another violet green. Two more tanagers, grosbeak, Wilson's, tanager, Lasley.
All right, so that's Bear Divide. It's this narrow gap where we can stand and watch birds fly over, often really low. Hopefully you saw some of those birds were, a foot off the ground, up to 7 or 8 feet off the ground this day. And it's a super cool spot. There's not a lot of places where you can stand there and see birds migrate, especially these birds like warblers and tanagers and orioles and stuff tend to do a lot of their migrating at night and tend to do a lot of their migrating really high up. And so we can't just stand there and watch them migrate like we can with things like, raptors or waterfowl in a lot of places. So this is a really cool spot. And I think a lot of you have probably been up there and have some idea of what's going on up there. Bear Divide is a place that has been known to birders for quite a while because I think in the 90s, early 2000s, some condors hung out up there and people went up to check it out. It's also a good spot for some local breeders like black-chinned sparrow. But 4 years ago, Dan Maxwell, the tall, handsome fellow there, was doing some work. He was doing some consulting work up in the area, and they were having like a morning meeting in the pullout right at Bear Divide in mid-April. And he was, trying to pay attention to what he was supposed to do for the day, but like hundreds of warblers and stuff were flying by. And he told me and John Garrett about that. John Garrett had also been up there doing some surveys, doing hummingbird stuff, and noticed birds flying by. And so the next year was the year I moved here from Louisiana. And John and I started going up there kind of intermittently, not always together, just to try to see, is this a spot where there's regular movements, or was this just kind of a freak day that Dan happened to be up there that a lot of birds were going by for whatever reason? The more we started to go up there, the more we realized that it really is a regular spot with birds moving regularly. And in that first season or two, we kind of started to build up a core group of birders going up there regularly, especially me and Dan and John, and Adam Searcy and Kelsey Reckling, Lauren Hill, Dave Mole, Devin Camerix-Burke, and Christine and Nadish Satyan. And if there's somebody I left out, sorry. It's not because I forgot, it's just giving a talk. And over the next 2 years, we spent more and more time up there and had some really good days, and started to realize that, yeah, when the conditions are right, this is a spot where you can really reliably go and just stand there and see a lot of birds migrate, particularly land birds. Last year, on April 23rd, we estimated almost 14,000 individual birds. That is crazy to me, especially somewhere here in California. I mean, I've never, and I'll go into it a bit, aside from Butterbread Spring, I've never been to or even heard of a place where you can see 14,000 migrating land birds in the morning anywhere on the West Coast. You might ask how we came to this number, and it's a very good question. We did our best this day to kind of count totals. And so what we did, because we're spending a lot of time trying to identify, what we did was 5-minute point count. So we spend 5 minutes, not identify anything, just kind of take a broad view and just try to count as many birds. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or go by 5s or 10s to try to get like how many birds were coming through per minute. So we did 5 minutes of that, and then a half hour, an hour later, 5 more minutes of that. So not trying to identify anything, just trying to get how many birds were coming through. And so once we extrapolated to that, we got to almost 14,000. But amazing, and another amazing thing about this number is, if you've ever been to Bear Divide, there's kind of 2 passes. So we stand up at the upper pass, but down at the picnic area is another pass. And there are maybe just as many birds going by down there. It's just we can't watch them both at once. So, this day there could have been, potentially double this number of birds. There could have been 30,000 birds going by this day. This is just what we counted right at Bear Divide. So it's a really cool spot. And this is only with, we've only been going up there for 3 years. And really, this is the first year that we've been going up, very regularly. The 2 years before that were just kind of here and there when we could. Last year, Birdcast kind of took notice of us and did a cool post on these big migration movements that we've been doing. Birdcast is a great website. I'll show a little bit about it later, but it's generally, if you don't know it, I highly recommend checking it out. They're kind of all things bird migration. Particularly, they use algorithms that they've developed to analyze radar data and give live analyses and predictions of how and when birds are moving. And they use our sites like Bear Divide, and especially sites in the east, to sort of ground truth that. And they're really interested in all things migration. So this is cool to get featured last year. I just want to kind of point out, there's a bunch of different major flyways, and these differ for land birds and water birds and whatever. But where we are here is along the Pacific Flyway. That blue arrow. One important thing about this is that, we kind of have our own composition of species, things like hermit warblers, maybe Lawrence's goldfinches, that are pretty much endemic to this Pacific Flyway. And we don't have a lot of places in the Pacific Flyway to watch migration. There are quite a few places in Europe. There are quite a few places on the East Coast of the US and some in Central Asia where you can, that are like Bear Divide, where you can stand and watch migration. But there's really very, very little on the West Coast. And in fact, it was really kind of thought for a while that there just is no visible migration of land birds on the Pacific Flyway. So what do we mean by morning flight? Morning flight is really this kind of phenomenon that we see at Bear Divide that's seen other places like Cape May, where there are migrating land birds that can be seen low down to the ground during the day in the morning, migrating. In Cape May, it's thought that these are birds that are repositioning. So they're flying along the coast, it's dark out, it gets light, and they can see that they're out over water, and so they turn around and come back, and these are birds flying back in. That may or may not be the case there. It probably is. At Bear Divide, it's probably different. It's probably birds getting funneled and continuing to migrate to try to find good food. But Cape May is actually fairly well known. Tom Johnson's taken a lot of cool pictures. And today he sent me this really neat video he made. So this is not from Bear Divide, it's from Cape May, but it just demonstrates what morning flight is like. And also the soundtrack is excellent. So feel free to dance along at home. That's it. I love that video. We got to start trying to take video up at Bear Divide. I mainly take pictures, but it's good stuff. I went to graduate school at LSU, and they used to put out these they still do put out these teaser videos on YouTube before a big football game, and that was exactly the kind of music that they'd use, get all pumped up to beat Alabama. Anyway, so going back to morning flight on the Pacific Flyway. Really, before we got an idea that Bear Divide had a lot of birds moving, kind of the only spot that was known where you could see lots of birds migrating in the morning was Butterbret Spring out in Kern County, which has been known and gone to for a while. It was studied really fairly intensely in the 90s, especially by folks like Matt Heindel and John Wilson and Dave Blue, who went there a ton in the late 80s through maybe late 90s. And now it gets, intermittent coverage. Most of the people that go there in kind of late May, early June, which is vagrant seasons, stuff like Kentucky warblers and hooded warblers and stuff. But if you go there during peak migration season in mid to late April, even early May, there are really big movements of migrants there in the morning. There was one day, I think it was Sandy Kuntz and Andrew Howe, estimated 80,000 birds there. Again, back in the 90s, but it's a really cool spot. And what's thought to happen there is birds are flying over the desert and they're migrating, it gets light, they're looking for a place to put down for the day and find some food, and it's desert and they can't find anything. And they eventually get funneled up this canyon that Butterbret Spring is on. And as it gets narrower and narrower, there's all of a sudden this big spring with water and cottonwoods and stuff like that, and they put down to feed. Bear Divide is right here. And it's a little bit different from Butterbret. It's not out off on the desert It doesn't look like these birds are coming in off the desert. And in fact, it's right next to one of the biggest cities in the world. It only takes me 35 minutes to get there from my house, right up in the kind of extreme eastern edge of the San Gabriel Mountains in the Angeles, well, bordering the Angeles National Forest, kind of right sandwiched between Santa Clarita and get the name of that neighborhood right there off 210 there. So what's going on here? What we kind of think is that birds that are trying to fly north from the LA basin or along the coast, are to some extent a little bit reluctant to cross the higher mountains in the San Gabriels, whether it's because it's cold, it costs energy to fly higher up, or there may not be food there. For whatever reason, they're probably reluctant to go too high. And so if you take a look at the topography there, what I've done is I've added sort of digital fog up to 820 meters. So the mountains stick up above that. So if you're a bird and you're trying to stay below this digital fog, you're flying north and hitting the mountains, nowhere to go. So you keep flying kind of northwest, looking for a spot to cross across the mountains. Bear Divide's really the first spot with a low gap there. And you can see also there's sort of two canyons that, like Butterbret, start wide and they get narrow and narrow as they go up. And Bear Divide is sort of the end of that very narrow end. And of course, you can see around the left side, there is kind of a big gap. And that's sort of the I-5 corridor where Richard Crosley's actually been spending a bunch of time this year there and farther north. And he's had significant movements of migrants, some days more than us in Bear Divide. And so birds are obviously going around as well, but they're definitely funneling through Bear Divide. One of the most common questions I get when I'm up there is where are these birds coming from and where are they going to? The short answer is all sorts of places. Generally, most of them are coming from somewhere to the south of us, and most of them are going somewhere to the north of us, though that's not necessarily true for all of them. So we have some species, just a few, namely Swainson's thrush, western wood peely, and olive-sided flycatcher, that winter from Central America all the way down into southern South America, along the Andes particularly. So these Swainson's thrushes, it shows the winter abundance in southern Mexico and Central America and stuff like that. And, if you go there, there's some, it's like, 0.03, but where really the vast majority of the winter is here along the east side of the Andes and the southern Andes. If you've ever been to Cusco in like November, December or something, Swainson's thrushes are abundant. So a lot of them are probably coming from there. So as we watch from winter, here's spring migration. Now they go through California, maybe Bear Divide and stuff, and they breed, up in the, here we go again. They breed in riparian forests in Northern California all the way up through the taiga forests in Northern Canada. So they're going a really long way, coming potentially from as far south as Northwest Argentina, coming through and going to either coastal California or far north as Alaska. We don't have that many birds coming from that far away. Again, Swainson's thrush, western wood peely, olive-sided flycatcher is about it. A lot of our birds, probably most of the birds that come through Bear Divide are birds that wintered in Mexico and Central America, like these Vox's swifts. Again, I'm starting January 1st with these GIFs. And if you're wondering where they came from, this is data from eBird processed by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. These are their models for where birds are at different times of year, and they're so cool. Starting January 1st, these are where the birds are wintering. So all along the west coast of Mexico, along the Sierra Madre Occidental, the Sierra Madre Oriental, and around the Yucatan Peninsula and the Sierra Madre Sul, etc. So as spring migration comes along, you can see them gathering and moving north, really mainly along the Pacific Flyway, even though they winter fairly far east in the Yucatan. Although one thing is these Yucatan birds are residents, that's a different subspecies. So our birds that are migrants are probably mostly wintering along West Mexico. So they come up through and they go up and breed up in Oregon, Washington, British Columbia. And that's a pretty common migration pattern for a lot of the birds at Bear Divide. Lots of birds are going from southern Western Mexico up into Oregon, Washington, British Columbia. Here's another example, warbling vireo, another one that winters Western Mexico, Southern Mexico, and big numbers come up through. Now, this one's through all of the Eastern US, right? Not just the West. This is actually two different subspecies that are quite different. And a paper just came out with, in my mind, very convincing evidence to split them into two different species, the Eastern and Western warbling vireo. And they actually look a bit different. Eastern has a much bigger, thicker bill. And our very own John Garrett actually documented one. I think the only documentation I know of that subspecies for California, caught one in the Farallon Islands a few years ago. So if they do get split, and it looks like they probably will, our only California record will be thanks to John. So thank you, John. So there's this eastern subspecies over here, the western subspecies on the west coast. They come up from Mexico. This is kind of March or so, and they come up right through California and generally go farther north. We have them as breeder again in riparian habitat in California, but lots of them are breeding in farther north in the mountains and the Rockies and the Sierra Nevadas and the Cascades. Again, this is a pretty common migration pattern. So we can just watch this again. I know I keep stopping it. It's kind of often just fun to watch all the way through. So there they are on their fall migration back to winter. Here's winter. Spring starts. Here's spring migration, then moving north. Here's breeding, then dispersal, then molt, then fall migration, and back down into their winter ground. We also have birds that are just moving within the Western US. They're not necessarily long distance migrants, but they seem to be moving quite a bit within their local range. So Lawrence's goldfinch is one of those. If you look at the map throughout the year, they kind of expand and contract, move around, move north, move south a little bit. Seem to have kind of complicated movements, but they're not going very far, particularly compared to the other ones. And we actually get lots and lots of Lawrence's goldfinches moving through Bear Divide. Another one is Phainopepla. Phainopepla is a bird that we thought, maybe moved around a little bit locally, maybe it was kind of nomadic. But this really cool paper came out 2 years ago by Dan Baldassari, who put GPS locators on Phainopeplas and found that they were going pretty far distances and they were doing it to breed twice. So these birds were breeding in like our oaky woodland, foothill woodlands, like here in Southern California, LA. Then they're flying all the way to the desert, sometimes all the way to like Southern Arizona, Sonora, Mexico, and they're breeding again, which is crazy. But we get lots of Phainopeplas moving through Bear Divide, especially in May. And this conforms pretty well with what Dan was saying in his data loggers, which is super cool. Some birds are probably just moving locally within the mountains. So band-tailed pigeon's a good one. This one's particularly happy. They have this long range. They occur also all the way into Bolivia, but they're resident all the way through these mountains. They're not migrating back and forth like some of those other species, but we get lots of them flying through Bear Divide. And so they're probably, you see there's not much change. Maybe, okay, they go a bit farther north to breed here in the summer and then contract a bit in the fall. So whether we're getting birds that breed in the San Gabriels and are just moving locally, or if we're getting birds that winter down here and are these birds that are flying up into Oregon, Washington to breed, who knows? Maybe it's something that someday we'll figure out where our band-tailed pigeons are going to and coming from, but we get lots of them flying through Bear Divide. Cassin's kingbird is another one that surprised me. Cassin's kingbird is a species that if you live in LA or if you live in Southern California, you probably think of as a complete resident, which is true for this little population here, but the whole, what I would call the eastern population that breeds in Arizona and New Mexico is a migrant. And it's thought that at least some of the birds in California, so you see, they fly up, these migrants are moving up into, and it's kind of cool. So in Southern California, they breed in like, Trader Joe's parking lots and stuff, but actually in New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, they're pretty restricted to breeding in highland elevation areas, particularly like pinyon and juniper woodland. And that range extends a little bit into California. So some of these birds here may be part of that population. And so we get Cassin's kingbirds moving through Bear Divide, particularly here, like March, April. So, and movements of them, not just, there's a pair that breeds at the station that you might see, but in March and April, we'll get, 20 or 30 Cassin's kingbirds moving through. So are they birds moving up and down the coast? Are they migrants that maybe wintered in Baja? You see like a bunch of them winter in Baja. Okay, maybe do they go across the Gulf or do they go up? Probably more likely to go up. So maybe it's birds that wintered in Baja going up north to, who knows, Nevada, Arizona, something like that, or maybe going farther north to California, kind of going on. But it's very cool, to me at least, because I really didn't expect to see Cassin's kingbirds migrating through Bear Divide. And the last couple of years, we certainly have. Not huge numbers, but significant numbers. So that's their migration. Let's go into a little bit like when do birds migrate at Bear Divide? If you're interested in going up into Bear Divide and checking it out, you can use Birdcast. Like I said earlier, they do a cool forecast of how many birds are going to be moving and where. So this is the next couple nights. So this I'm showing night of May 4th, which is that today? Yeah, that's today. So, you know, high is more yellow and even into white. So there's actually a pretty decent movement tonight. Then if you look down bottom middle, that's tomorrow night, pretty good movement too. And so that tells us just from Birdcast, there might be pretty good movement at Bear Divide tomorrow. And you know, this is just a prediction. It's not perfect, but it's been pretty good in the past. In general, migration of Bear Divide kind of happens from the end of March to about the middle of May. So anytime during that time when the weather looks good, maybe check out Birdcast, see what's going on, might be a good day to head up to Bear Divide. Here's just the raw weather data, and I just wanted to show this because it's pretty cool. We can actually watch birds moving on the weather. So just to kind of calibrate what you're looking at, all this stuff you might recognize as clouds moving one direction, but birds actually have a pretty unique signature on radar because they're a lot lower down often than the clouds. The way radar works is like a cone going up. So anything lower down, it's only going to detect closer to the radar, but as it's higher up, it detects farther from the radar, which is why the clouds are interrupted. But you see down here in North Carolina, there are these little discrete circles. That's not because there's only stuff in those circles, it's because it's low down to the ground and the radar can only pick it up when it's low. So birds look like fairly discrete circles usually, and usually just all moving north. And that's how you can tell them from weather. So let's just watch. This was last night. This was what the radar looked like last night. So you can see, so this is during the day. When it gets dark, you'll see liftoff. As the dust goes across the US, you'll see birds lift off and start moving. There we go. All the birds are moving through the night, through the early morning, and about now it's dawn and it's quieted down again. So we'll just kind of go back through that so all these birds lifting off that were migrating from Florida all the way through the Southeast US. And you can see these clouds moving. And then not long after, a bunch of birds lift off and start moving through California. You can see one interesting thing, if you look at California, is these birds do kind of tend to follow the mountains, not high up in the mountains, but following along the foothills or the base of the foothills. You can see they're following along the western Sierra Nevada, the transverse ranges down here like the San Gabriels and the Santa Ynez Mountains and the coastal mountains. So these birds do seem to be, as opposed to the eastern US where the birds, it's just like a blanket of birds everywhere. Here they do kind of tend to be following the mountains, or at least the foothills of the mountains. So this is pretty cool. You can also go and just look at this radar. A lot of times when I wake up in the morning, you know, early to go to Bear Divide, I'll check this radar out, just kind of see what's going on, because the Birdcast is a prediction, but this is real data. You're actually watching birds, which is cool. What have we been doing at Bear Divide? So we've been counting birds. So the first 2 years we were just going up there intermittently kind of birding and stuff. And then this winter, I wrote and received a grant from Pasadena Audubon Society, a small grant, but enough to pay a bander, not a bander, a counter, although I think he does band birds sometimes, enough to pay a counter to stand up there and count birds. I wanted to do it, but it's not my actual job. So a lot of my time at Bear Divide has been, it's only a half hour away, you know, running up early, counting birds for a little bit, and then at like 8:30 driving back and putting a day of work. So I couldn't do it. And luckily Devin Kamrich-Burke here, who lives in Ventura, is an excellent birder. He's up to the challenge, and we've had him counting up there 5 days a week this season. And we set up this cool little data entry. You saw all these birds were coming by, and you know, how do we keep up with it? Well, we set up this cool little data entry thing with the help of the folks at Dunkadoo, this company called Dunkadoo that specializes in bird migration technology. And we have this neat interface where we have nice big buttons, and we can constantly change it. So we can have whatever the most common bird is going to be that day or was the day before, we can put it right at the top. So this day, there were probably lots of orange crown, Nashville warblers, Townsend warblers, black-throated gray warblers. So if a bunch fly by, Devin can really quickly, all right, black-throated gray, 2, go on. Nashville, 5, move on, you know, and what direction are they flying? So it actually works really well. We've been using it this whole season, and we really like it. Another advantage is it takes a timestamp. an exact timestamp for every time a bird goes by, and that really is going to help us with data analysis. If you want to check this out, you can watch the data come in live. I set up this little website called beardivide.org that just links to where you can get live data, where you can donate to us, and where you can check out recent sightings on eBird. If you go to the main site of Dunkadoo on a big day in Bear Divide, this is what it might look like. So this is just live data of birds passing by Bear Divide as we're seeing them. So this was, you can tell this is kind of like early April I took this. So it's like Violet Green Swallow, Nashville Warbler, Audubon's Warbler, stuff like that. Some of our earlier season stuff, but it's pretty cool to get to watch this data come in live, especially, you know, once this was all up and running and I could just wake up and have my coffee and just see what birds are going by up there. It's pretty fun. If you go to our personal website for the project, this is a screenshot from my phone, so it's not like for desktop, but you can you can also watch the live data come through just as plots. So like here, you know, 32 yellow-rumped warblers came by, and then another 35, and some red-winged blackbirds and some grosbeaks and stuff. And so this plot, if we were streaming data live, which we will be tomorrow morning, check it out tomorrow morning, is constantly refreshing and it's constantly kind of moving. So you can just see stuff as it comes in. If you go further in the site, you can get all sorts of cool stuff. We flag our notable sightings. So this was today. So today, Devin counted 991 individuals of 72 species. Saw common yellowthroat, which is pretty cool, which is notable. Cassin's finch, which is cool. Ashland flycatcher isn't particularly notable, but maybe his finger slipped. And then you can see the hourly data, what time all the individuals came through, species composition, how many of what we've seen. That pie chart isn't just for today, it's for the whole season, which is why there's so many Audubon's warblers and Florence's goldfinches and stuff. And then down below, there's some plots that show daily count by day. So there's all sorts of cool ways to explore these data, both over the whole season and live as it's coming in. Here's an example of kind of what Bear Divide looks like this year. Now that we have people coming up and checking it out, we've got Devin, our counter, and he stands out because he's like 6'5", and a bunch of other people just looking at birds, watching stuff come by, helping Devin by trying to call his attention to birds or shout out birds that he didn't see, or just enjoying the experience. This is just another shot of what it looks down the canyon, of looking down the canyon. So you can see there's a big wide canyon that gets narrower and narrower. And this is actually when we brought, when John brought his Occidental College avian biology class up there, which was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool experience for these undergrads to learn about birds in the museum and from textbooks and stuff, and go on some field trips. But then they came up and, they saw 2,500 birds fly right by their faces that morning, which was cool. They really liked it. But how could you not? I like this picture. I guess it's not like full resolution. It's a little better in full resolution, but that's a Bullocks oriole just kind of flying right over everybody as they're, standing around looking for stuff. Another thing we've been doing up there is trying to record flight calls a little bit. A lot of these birds, the call they make while they're migrating or flying is different from the call they make when they're just sitting around. And it's hard to record them and know what they are because, you could set out a night flight recorder and hear stuff, but you don't actually know what it is. And in the East, like at Cape May, when all these birds are flying by, people have done a lot of recording of birds and then looking at them. And so it's like, okay, that was that because I can see it doing this flight call. But that's pretty tough in the West. And we still don't have a lot of high quality recordings of flight calls of Western birds. So I've been doing a little bit of that. I'll just let my microphone run. And if something flies right by, I'll call it out to the microphone so I know what it is. But we're hoping to ramp that up a little bit, and Brian Sullivan's been doing a little bit of this, and we'll also probably move this on to some night flight setups so we can kind of automatically detect stuff that's coming through there at night. And I want to highlight a project that's been going on that I have not been, I'm not involved with in any capacity besides I think it's super cool, and I really support them, and hopefully we'll share some data. Oh, my lights are on. Okay. But this year, there's been some bird banding going on, and that's been led by Walter Sakai, who bands birds at Zuma, and he's a faculty emeritus at Santa Monica City College, I think. I'm sorry if I got that wrong, Walt. But they've been setting up some nets and doing some bird banding and monitoring, which is super cool and actually complements the work we've been doing really well. So they've set up a couple nets and some really really good, really talented banders have kept up with almost 100 birds a day. Here's Lauren with a bunch of birds taken back to be processed and then released. In the, I don't know, 3-4 weeks they worked up there this year, they've caught over 1,000 birds already, over 40 species. Some cool stuff. And what's cool about this is, you know, if you come visit Bear Divide, you can stand there and see all these birds come by, but sometimes it's hard to see stuff. It's hard to know what you're seeing. Like when we took the students up there, you know, it was really tough. It's like, I call it triple black diamond birding. You know, it's very difficult birding. It's very difficult to identify stuff as it's just whipping right by you. But then you can stroll over to the banding station. The night folks there will usually show you stuff. I will say, I'm not in charge. I'm just saying, you know, usually they're friendly, but if you do happen to go up there and there's lots of people, you know, one thing to be mindful of is they have to be able to communicate and stuff. So if there's a lot of people, don't, you know, crowd them, don't have loud conversations and stuff around them while they're working. But other than that, they'll usually show you some cool birds if you ask them nicely. Probably the coolest bird they caught this year was a gray vireo, which is amazing to me. There are very few spring migrant records. There are very few migrant records of this bird, especially in California. It's one of those birds that seems to just teleport from its wintering range to its breeding range. There's a few fall records, a couple for San Clemente Island. And as far as spring records, I think before this bird, there were only 2 in Los Angeles County. They were on the same day, actually. And one of them was at Bear Divide. That first big day that Dan had at Bear Divide, when he saw those warblers migrating, he also had a singing gray vireo. So I was always kind of thinking, oh yeah, what if we got another gray vireo up here? It'd be so cool. And then this just a few days ago, they caught a gray vireo, and this was actually singing too. This bird was singing in the hand, which is very cool. They've also, the past few days, they've caught 3 or 4 different canescens bell sparrows. So this is there are 2 subspecies of bell sparrow. And don't get it confused with bells and sagebrush sparrow, which are 2 different species. There are 2 subspecies, the belli, which breeds in the foothills around here and actually breeds not far from Bear Divide, and canescens, which breeds down on the desert floor. And often, or sometimes after breeding, will disperse up into the mountains. These birds are dispersing really early. And in fact, we didn't even know they were at Bear Divide. And so the fact they've been able to catch them and ID them to subspecies is pretty cool. And we don't know exactly what's going on. Kimball suggested that maybe they're failed breeders that have decided to disperse early away from the breeding range. And as far as I know, most of the ones they caught, or at least this one, was a young male, which maybe makes sense. If it's really dry in the desert, there's not a lot of good territories. Maybe the only decent territories go to the dominant adult males, and the young ones are just like, well, you know, screw it, I'll try again next year. Who knows? But it's very cool they've been catching them, and that's the little thing we're learning. So just real quickly, like, what have we learned so far at Bear Divide? I think the most important thing we've learned so far is that the San Gabriel Mountains appear to be a really important corridor for land bird migration in the Pacific Flyway. Maybe a lot more than we thought. You know, the fact that we can go see 13,000 birds in the morning, 14,000 birds in the morning is not something I expected. And I think it may be of huge importance to some of these species as a migration corridor. We've kind of started to look at the data a little bit. So here's like when birds move, arranged from top is earliest, mean migration rate, migration date, and bottom is latest. So one of the earliest birds to move is yellow-armed warbler, particularly Audubon's warbler, but they're kind of spread out. And then you get these nice tight peaks and things like hermit warbler, black-throated gray warbler, warbling bear, where lots of them move really quickly. And then you also have more spread out things, again, like Bullock's oriole, yellow warbler. Yellow warbler tends to be later. So, you know, one of the things we can really get into is why is this? You know, generally, probably the birds with broader range are birds that have a broader breeding range, right? So they're going to all sorts of different places, whereas the birds that are compressed maybe have smaller breeding ranges, so they're kind of all going to the same place. We don't really know, but we're trying to work it all out. But this is just also just kind of like this plot. It looks cool. So this is just all the I don't know, 22 or whatever it is, most common migrants at Bear Divide, and the spread of when we've had them moving through. This does not include this year's data. It's just data from the past 2 years. Another cool thing we can do is ground truth these radar observations. So I showed you earlier these radars moving, these radar images, and I told you those were birds, and there's a lot of research to support that. But you know, what's really valuable is if we see birds moving, or we think there are birds moving based on the radar, based on birdcast, to actually go out and look, oh, okay, are there actually birds moving? And so we started to use our data to kind of ground truth these observations. And you can see there's a generally positive correlation between the total migration traffic rate at these radar sites. This is one radar site picked out from the Santa Ana Mountains in Orange County, and the birds we see. And generally, the correlation tends to be best if the birds are passing through Orange County between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. So maybe it takes them, 3 or 4 hours to get to Bear Divide from there, which makes sense. Another thing we're kind of looking at is why do different species move at different times of year? I showed you there were those, they don't all move at the same time. Some move earlier, some move later. One thing that explains that at least a little bit is breeding latitude. So generally the birds that breed farther north tend to migrate later. And that makes sense because it's colder farther north later. If you go all the way up to the North Slope of Alaska, the last week of May, like there's still probably snow on the ground. And this has been found in other taxa as well, especially within species, that birds that birds that breed farther north tend to migrate later. And so we've found support for this as well in our data at Bear Divide. We've also had some cool stuff, some unexpected stuff. I had a summer tanager a couple of years ago, which is neat. It's kind of a rare local breeder. We've had maybe 10 to 12 blue grosbeaks by now, which I also think is really cool. And I didn't really expect. They're also kind of an uncommon local riparian breeder that I didn't expect to be moving through the mountains, but maybe I was wrong. But they're cool. This year we've had a lot of finches, which is really neat. Prior to this year, we had 0 Cassin's finches, we had very few pine siskins, and we had only like 1 day with movement of purple finches. This year, we had purple finches, big numbers of purple finches every day for our first month and a half. We've had Cassin's finches, we've had numbers of Cassin's finches just about every day this spring. And we've had really big numbers of pine siskins. So this is a big year for finches, which is really cool. And like, what are they doing? Are these locally moving birds? Just moving around within the transverse ranges? Are they moving up to the Sierra Nevada? Are they going farther? Why are there so many this year? Why weren't there any the past few years? Are all interesting questions that maybe we'll never know the answer to, or maybe we'll get some ideas about with future years of study. Seems to be a really important spot for violet green swallows. Also, we get a lot of cliff swallows, but cliff swallows are more widespread. Violet green swallows are more or less endemic to the Pacific Flyway, and we get huge numbers at Bear Divide. So this may also be a potentially important corridor for swallows. Another thing we're seeing is sex-based migration timing, which is, again, well known. In theory, in the spring, adult males should get on a breeding territory first so they can set up a good territory and start defending it. And then the females and the young males arrive later, and that's exactly what we see at Bear Divide. For just about any species where we can easily sex them, like hermit, black-throated gray warbler, western tanager, and orioles and stuff, we get adult males for 2 to 3 weeks before we start to see any females or young males. So it's pretty cool to, that's something we kind of know about bird migration, but it's really cool to stand there and watch it and start to build data about it. Although we don't try to sex birds in flight, but except by photos, but that may be something we may add eventually if we feel like we can handle it. Another interesting thing is that we get water birds moving through Bear Divide sometimes. I don't think it's a globally important spot for water birds, although Corey, forgetting spacing on your last name right now, has been doing some night flight stuff and getting a lot of western least sandpipers. But we've had a number of times, I think 5 different times now, we've had a flock of western sandpipers go through. We've had common loons a few times, double-crested cormorants, stuff like that. So that's kind of fun. Thrushes, in my mind, we get surprisingly few thrushes. Some places, in Northern California, places where you can't really see or hear a lot of migration, you can still hear tons of Swainson's thrushes, especially moving through. And we get thrushes, but a good day for either Swainson's or hermit thrush for us is like 10 or 12. Whereas if you had told me there was a spot you could see 14,000 birds migrating in the mountains in California, I would have expected, hundreds of those would have been Swainson's thrushes, but that's not the case. Maybe it's because they move at night more. They certainly do tend to move at night more than some of these other species, and maybe they're moving through the undergrowth more. We're still not sure. We do get lots and lots of warblers, lots and lots of Nashville warblers. And that's kind of cool to me because that tells me a little bit, I think, about where these birds are going. We're pretty close to the coast here, but the species composition is more like Sierra Nevada, Cascades, Northern Rocky Mountains. So for example, Nashville warbler, there aren't tons of Nashville warblers breeding in the coastal range of California. You have to go pretty far north before you get into any Nashville warblers at all. Most of the Nashville warblers that breed, in the Western US breed farther east than the coastal ranges in the Cascades, Rockies, Sierra Nevada, and we get tons and tons and tons of national warblers. It's some days in mid-April, it's our most common bird. So I think that kind of tells me one thing about Bear Divide, that these birds aren't necessarily going up the coastal ranges. They're probably cutting up into the Tehachapi's and going into the Sierra Nevada more than anything else. We also just get lots and lots and lots of Wilson's warblers. So Bear Divide could potentially be a really important, globally important flyway for at least the western populations of Wilson's warblers, which is the majority of Wilson's warblers. We get some raptors. Bear Divide doesn't appear to be a really good raptor migration site. We get some Swainson's hawks and sharp-binned hawks and stuff moving through there, but not tons. But we haven't spent much time there in the afternoon, so maybe they do move through there and we just don't know. We also haven't spent much time kind of earlier in March when the really big movements of Swainson's hawks happen. So we haven't seen tons of raptors yet, but we still could be missing them. We could still learn that we have them. Another cool thing is, I try to just take as many pictures as I can. I really like these pictures. They look cool, but I'm mainly not really trying for good pictures. I'm just taking lots of pictures so I can help identify stuff. When I first started up there, things were just zipping by and I didn't know what it was. And so I just started taking as many pictures as I could. And then I could, okay, I get this impression from that bird and that's what it ended up being. And then kind of starting to train my brain like, okay, this is get that, this is that, by looking back at my pictures after I saw the bird. But doing that has picked up some cool stuff. So some hybrids, like hybrids and integrades, and bonus points for anybody in the chat who can tell me what the difference is between a hybrid and an intergrade. Like this Audubon's myrtle, yellow-rumped warbler, this other Audubon's ex-myrtle, yellow-rumped warbler. We've also had 3 different adult male hermit Townsend's warblers. Like this one looks like a hermit warbler, but hermit warblers have no yellow below the black on the throat. This has yellow and streaks like Townsend's. Or this one that looks like a Townsend's warbler. The Townsend's do have yellow and streaks below, and this one doesn't, just like a hermit warbler. So they've all looked pretty different. So that's pretty cool. I mean, growing up in California, birding in California, I've seen a couple hermit Townsend's warbler hybrids ever, and they've all been in the fall. And then now at Bear Divide, I've seen 3 different adult males in the spring, which is pretty cool, which I'd never seen anywhere in California before in the spring. We've had 1 or 2 black-shinned sparrows. This is a local breeder, a fairly common local breeder. So I have no idea if the ones that are flying by are migrants or if they're just moving around locally, but they do migrate. It's another bird like gray vireo that kind of just teleports. So whether we're seeing these birds as migrants or these are just local birds is unclear, but it's cool to see them. They're great. Some other local movements are a lot bigger than expected, or at least than I would have expected. Things, birds that are more or less residents, like band-tailed pigeons, although again, there seems to be some population moving north, but acorn woodpeckers, and birds that are thought to be nomadic, like Lawrence's goldfinches, we get really regular northward movements of them. It's not just a flock here or there or whatever. It's some days, we'll have 500 Lawrence's goldfinches all going north right through the divide. So we're learning things about, I think, kind of regular movements of birds that we thought either didn't move much or, had more irregular movements. And hopefully we'll learn more about that as we get more data. Now, again, surprising numbers of phainopeplas. We're recently learning they move farther than we thought, and we're really seeing that at Bear Divide, especially in May. If you come up in the next couple of days, I'm guessing, it's hard to know for sure, but I'm guessing we'll probably see numbers of phainopeplas. Another thing we're learning about is time of day. What time birds move when. It seems to shift a little bit with weather. So if birds are flying into north wind, flying into headwind, they're slowed down a bit, they fly a little later. If there's a south wind, a tailwind, they fly a little earlier. But different species seem to move different times of day. So for example, these big flycatchers like ash-throated flycatcher and western kingbird and Cass's kingbird seem to move later in the day. Hummingbirds seem to move later in the day. A lot of times when everything tails off, it's like, okay, now here come the hummingbirds, which is pretty cool. And things like warblers, the cardinalids like western tanager, lazuli bunting, black-headed grosbeak seem to move a little earlier in the day. So hopefully we'll be able to use these data, especially with the Dunkadoo taking a timestamp of every single bird when it comes by in association with weather data to get a better handle on exactly why birds move at different times of day. What do we still have to learn? I think I picked out a tip of the iceberg picture, and this doesn't even capture it because we're just starting to scratch the surface of what we can learn at Bear Divide. There's probably some really basic stuff that we don't even know, and so hopefully we can keep counting up there, we can keep seeing birds, we can keep getting people up there, and we'll continue to learn a lot more at Bear Divide. So if you're interested in Bear Divide, how can you get involved? How can you keep up with what's going on? Check the website, beardivide.org. It's got live data, it's got eBird lists. Come visit. You're always welcome to swing by when we're counting. And we're also more than happy to take donations. There's a donation link on the site. What we will use those donations for is to pay our counter's salary or our stipend. In the future, this is something I really hope to set up long term. So the more kind of a pot of money we can have in years that maybe we don't get the grant money or whatever, the more set up and stable this count will be. I'm looking for academic jobs. Who knows, maybe I'll get a job in like Norway or something and I'll have to leave this behind. I would really like to leave it in good shape that it will be able to continue going and collecting data in perpetuity. And also, potentially we might buy things like gear for counters, like Devin doesn't have a camera. Our next counter that's coming out, Matt Brady, doesn't have a camera. So, we're kind of a, garage band of organizations right now. But so any just sort of donations would help. With that, I'd like to acknowledge everybody who's worked up there and helped me up there, especially John McCormack, my boss, who has facilitated a lot of this, not just with being patient about what time I arrive for work, but also he's provided money and resources for this project, as has John Feenstra, and especially Moore Lab of Zoology and Pasadena Audubon Society provided Devin's funding this year. And I'll let you read through the rest of them, but everybody's great. And if I forgot you on this, again, I'm sorry. And that's all I got for you.
And that actually was quite a bit. Thank you very, very much.
No problem.
And let me go to that. And an interesting side point, or side highlight or whatever, we had a moon watch a week or two ago. You may know from watching LA birds and all that. And we were kind of rained out or clouded out, but a few of us watched a day later after the full moon, and I had 10 birds. And Don Sturba, a local birder over on the west side, said, "Send me your coordinates and all that, and I'll punch them into my program and tell you which way the birds were heading." And I'm in Monrovia, so my Monrovia birds going across the moon, the vast majority, 3/4, were heading west. So in other words, they were going right along the ridge, the foothills and the mountain, probably right to Bear Divide and up and over. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, that's super cool, and it makes sense.
Yeah. We have, thank you very much, Ryan. That was really fascinating. We have several questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, should I keep the screen share to pull up slides?
I don't think you need to.
Okay.
Do you want to read the questions, or would you like me to read the questions to you?
I can.
Okay.
If that's all right.
No, please go ahead.
Lance Banner asks, is the apparent radar signature of migration in California and the lack of coverage in deserts possibly related to a lack of radar coverage? I think not. There are radars in the desert. Edwards Air Force Base has a radar just right out in the middle of the desert, and you can sort of see the birds moving or following the mountains. The mountains really do stick out. So that could be the case, but it does seem that they're at least kind of using the foothills a bit, avoiding the floor of the Central Valley, avoiding the middle of the Mojave Desert, kind of, and avoiding the tall mountains. Now, clearly birds do migrate through there. If you've ever been to Gallo Hill, birds do migrate across the middle of the desert. But as far as we could see, kind of the big numbers and the majority of birds seem to maybe be following those routes. So I don't think there is a lack of radar coverage, but I could be wrong about that.
Cool.
Ira Blitz asked how Bear Divide was discovered. That was, I told that right at the beginning, but Dan Maxwell, who's a local birder who lives in Ventura County, was doing some consulting work nearby, and they were having a morning meeting in the pullout at Bear Divide, and there were just like hundreds of birds going by. And around the same time, John Garrett, who we all know and love, was doing similar work nearby on hummingbirds and noticed quite a few migrants going by. And John Feenstra is also like John Feenstra has noticed birds moving through the San Gabriels and stuff. So it wasn't totally unknown that any migrant birds move through the San Gabriels, but it was really Dan and John especially that figured out that Bear Divide is a spot where lots of birds move.
Cool.
Kathy Ellsworth, what camera and lens does he use? I use a Canon 7D with a fixed 400 millimeter lens that I bought used off Todd McGrath after I got carjacked in Mexico. I lost all my stuff. So it's a good camera, but someday I'll buy a new one. But it's wonderful, and I appreciate. Thank you, Todd, for the camera. Lance Benner asks says there's additional evidence for migration along foothills from moonwatches previous years, which at least on the coastal slope show much larger numbers along San Gabriel Mountains foothills than farther south of the mountains. I think that does make sense. I think a lot of these birds from Bear Divide, a lot of them I showed, aren't really wintering necessarily in Baja. They're wintering farther south in Mexico and Central America. So these aren't necessarily birds that are coming up the coast. They're coming up Sonora and at some point getting across the desert and then hitting these mountains and going up and into the Sierra Nevada. So I totally agree with that. And that may have to do with why, some of the migration sites farther south, like Paul Lehman has been doing migration watching on Mount Soledad in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, that's not apples to apples because it's right on the coast and it's a little bit of a different setup. But we tend to get about 10 times as many birds as he does on average. And so, that may have something to do with it is these aren't all necessarily birds coming from Baja. In fact, most of them probably are not. Janet Scheel says from Don White on the live string, why do you think we get several species migrating through in the morning that may normally be thought of as nighttime migrants? Is it perhaps individuals that were delayed during nighttime? That's an excellent question and something we're still trying to figure out. The thought of morning flight, and Cape May is like this, Butterbett's kind of like this. If you go to the fall coast in California in the fall, it's like this, where the thought is that it's birds finishing up their nocturnal migration. So you got early and there's lots of birds flying, and then as it gets light, birds keep flying, and for an hour or so they trickle through. So they're just kind of finishing up their nocturnal migration. But at Bear Divide, and Crosley's noticed this nearby, that doesn't really seem to be what's going on. Even on good days, when we get there early pre-dawn, it's pretty quiet. There's very few birds moving, and we're not hearing stuff moving high up. Stuff isn't slowly coming down. It's just, there's not much. And then all of a sudden, as soon as it starts to get light, the birds are starting to move by. So we're thinking, maybe they put down early, and then as it starts to get light, they look around, they're like, this habitat's not great, and they maybe move to find some better habitat. Maybe they're foraging a bit in the chaparral. We're still not really sure. It's a great question, and one kind of maybe the biggest question, as far as it should be obvious, but we have no idea that we have up there, and that maybe someday we'll be able to answer. Calvin Bond asks, are there any morning flights known in Central America? Not to my knowledge. There are a number of very good raptor flights in Central America, famously in Veracruz, and there's some spots in Costa Rica, and I don't know where else, but some other spots. There's really great spots to watch raptor migration in Central America. I don't know of any morning flight sites in Central America, but I could be wrong.
Wow. Talk about a whirlwind. Yeah, no pun intended. That actually was a fantastic presentation. Mark and Frank and Susan, do you guys have anything that you would like to add or ask?
No, just a big thanks to Ryan for putting this together right in the middle of a very busy season, and appreciate it a lot because it puts it into context and encourage people to go up there and see it for themselves. And donations are really important because this is it's very entrepreneurial. It's on the shoestring, and it's something that birders can really contribute to community science. So encouraging.
Yeah, Absolutely. And if you haven't been up to a migration site such as Bear Divide, please go up. Ryan, I think, would love to have Ryan and everyone else up there would love to have you up there. Let's get that interest up and going.
Absolutely. Thanks, Frank. And
Yeah. Mark, anything?
Well, thank you very much, Ryan, for a fantastic talk. And it'd be really interesting to know, if these birds are really, flying throughout the night, and then maybe, settling down for a bit and then deciding to move. The question is, where were they the day before? Are these birds that the day before, were they in the LA basin? Were they further south? Were they hanging out for a few days in the rest of the San Gabriels? Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I don't know. I think maybe they were, over the LA basin or something. We see, when we had that big 13,000 bird day, there had been bad conditions for like 2 weeks before that and not much had moved. But in the LA basin, people had seen big buildups of migrants. Like as Naresh pointed out that he had like all-time biggest numbers of migrants at some of his local patches a few days before that. So
oh, wow.
Maybe they are building up in the LA basin or somewhere nearby.
Interesting.
One last thing, I just want to say Calvin Bond correctly answered the difference between integrades and hybrids, which is that integrades are breeding between subspecies, so within species, and a hybrid is between different species. So a Myrtle X Audubon's is an integrate and a Townsend's X Hermit is a hybrid. And so Calvin wins a free ticket to the next LA Birders presentation.
Calvin is a regular and we're very proud of him.
Calvin is student birder. So right after your heart, he's 15 years old, just turned 15 a week ago.
Love it. I was a student birder too. And I guarantee you already know a lot more than I did when I was 15, because I was probably like 32 when I learned the difference between integrate and hybrid. So good job, Calvin.
Calvin is tops. That's great. And I don't see, I do see. Another question popped up from Lily, another young birder of ours. And she asked, do the birds migrate through Bird Divide in the morning and then go down into the woodlands later in the day?
Probably. We don't know exactly where they go. We watch them fly off to the north. They dip down, they don't fly straight or up. When they're coming across the gap, they really go back down. So, at least preliminarily, they're going into the kind of Placerita drainage. But after that, no idea. No idea.
And then
except I know they're probably not going straight to Butterbret, because like the birds move at Butterbret kind of before they move at Bear Divide, and it would only take them an hour or so to fly to Butterbret. So all I know is they're not flying directly to Butterbret. But other than that,
Cool. Very cool. Well, I don't see any more questions. I also want to add my thank you very much for a wonderful talk. I hope it generates lots of interest in people coming up to Bear Divide to keep you company tomorrow and the next morning, and probably throughout the rest of the season. How long do you plan on counting up there this year?
We'll be up there. We should be up there 5 days a week until the end of May.
Okay. And
Tuesday through Saturday.
And have you also thought about a fall, or it isn't hopping in the fall?
That's a good question, and I wish you hadn't asked it, because I'm embarrassed about the answer, which is I've never been up there in the fall. I always intend to. I don't think, my gut is that it's probably not as good in the fall because it doesn't have that same setup and stuff, but
right.
Who knows? There could be plenty of birds there in the fall. I just like every time, and this is like the terrible thing about living in Southern California, but every time I have a free morning and want to go up there, some great vagrant gets found that I have to either go chase, or in the fall I kind of spend my time on the coast looking for rarities when I have free time. So that's
right.
It's no excuse, but so we don't know actually. Go up there in the fall, check it out.
Yeah.
See what's going on.
One last question: how's your Norwegian?
It's terrible. I hope I don't get a job. Hopefully I'll get a job in an English, Spanish, or maybe Portuguese speaking country.
Sounds good. Well, Ryan, again, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And we hope to have you back soon to kind of get more of a final count of Bear Divide. And with that, we will probably see you next week since your boss is here and you have to cheer him on.
Yes, yeah, he did a great job. He hasn't done it yet.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, I will see you all next week. Next week, we have John McCormick at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night, and I hope to see everyone there and then. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye, everyone.
All right, goodbye.